Surely everyone has seen these stone statues before. They are located on Easter Island. No other place has them, and they've been preserved since ancient times. Easter Island is a remote island in the South Pacific Ocean. The closest continent is South America, specifically Chile, which is about 3,700 kilometers away. Currently, the island is part of Chilean territory. But what does 3,700 kilometers mean? It means a 5-hour flight by plane quite far. Not only is it very far from the mainland, but also from any inhabited place. The nearest populated island to Easter Island is the Pitcairn Islands, which are 2,000 kilometers away. In other words, within a 2,000 kilometers radius of the island, there are no people. If you stand on the island and look around, you will see nothing else on Earth, just the sea. That's why Easter Island is considered one of the most isolated islands in the world. The island is very small, with an area of only 163 square kilometers. The indigenous people don't call it Easter Island. They call it Rapa Nui, which means Big Island, because to them, it was the biggest island, the center of the world. To them, the Earth only had this one island, so they called it the Big Island. Easter Island was formed by the eruption of 3 underwater volcanoes, giving it a triangular shape. At each corner is one of those volcanoes, but they are all extinct and no longer active. Currently, more than 6,000 people live on the island, but none are descendants of the original indigenous inhabitants. There are nearly 1,000 stone statues on Easter Island. They are about 4 to 10 meters tall and weigh between 10 and 82 tons. There's even one unfinished statue that's 21 meters tall and weighs around 250 to 300 tons. The more people study these statues, the more mysterious and unsolved questions arise. To this day, they remain a great puzzle for archaeologists and scientists. So, how did nearly 1,000 giant stone statues end up on such a remote island in the middle of the ocean? Who built them, and why? Why are they arranged in different positions? Some say the native people made them, others suggest aliens were involved, and still others believe they represent giants, ancestors of the island's original inhabitants, and that the statues moved to their current locations on their OW and SO. What's the truth? Today, let's talk about the mystery of the stone statues. As of now, there are about 1,000 Moai statues on the island. The average height is 4 to 10 meters, and their weight ranges from 10 to 82 tons. The statue in this picture is a Moai that stands 10 meters tall and weighs 82 tons. Most of the statues are buried in the ground, with only their upper bodies, from the shoulders up, visible. The largest Moai known on the island is an unfinished statue, still partially buried, about 21 meters tall and weighing around 250 to 300 tons. It is called unfinished because it is still attached to the bedrock and hasn't been fully carved out and erected. From this unfinished statue, we can infer how the Moai were made. They weren't carved from already extracted stones. Instead, they were carved directly from the mountain and then stood upright. The giant statue still embedded in the mountain is not yet fully shaped. There are over 400 such unfinished statues on the island. There are also statues carved from the side, not just from below. Despite differences in size, most of the Moai statues have a similar appearance. Deep eyes, high nose, broad chin, and long ears. Easter Island and its Moai statues are full of mysteries. While some of these mysteries have been solved, most remain unanswered. One of the biggest mysteries is how the Moai statues on this island were actually built. According to local legends, the islanders say that these stone statues represent their ancestors, who rose from the mountains and walked to their current locations, meaning the statues moved there on their own. Later, after analyzing the composition of the stones and their levels of weathering, scientists concluded that the statues were likely created between the 7th and 17th centuries AD. However, since this was so many centuries ago, such estimates aren't very reliable. All we can really say is that the statues were built in ancient times. One thing is certain. Before Europeans discovered the island, there was no metal available on Easter Island. So the islanders could not have had metal tools. If the statues were made by the islanders, they must have carved stone using other stone tools. However, all the rocks on the island are volcanic in origin and have similar hardness, so one must ask, is it even possible to carve such massive statues using rocks of equal hardness? And if it is, how many people would it take and how long would it take to finish them all? The second mystery is, what was the purpose of creating these statues? The locals said they were representations of their ancestors, built to bless the island with bountiful harvests. Later, when researchers excavated and tested the soil, they discovered something strange. As mentioned earlier, the entire island is made of volcanic rock, so the soil quality is generally very poor. But strangely, the areas around the statues had noticeably better soil, suitable for farming and animal husbandry. It seems as if the statues really did bless the land with fertile conditions. When investigators dug deeper, they discovered that the island has no rivers or freshwater lakes. Locals relied mainly on underground water sources. Even more remarkably, the Moai statues were often erected directly above underground water channels. In other words, wherever there's a statue, there's a source of water beneath. These were places where both the land and water quality were ideal. What's so strange is, how did the ancient builders know these spots had water? Today's people need modern machines to detect such things, but ancient people somehow knew exactly where to build. Not only that, they even erected giant stone statues to mark the spots with fresh water. Isn't that incredibly mysterious? In fact, more than 300 years ago, a famous Dutch explorer happened to stumble upon the island and witnessed the truth about this mysterious place. The story begins with the discovery of Easter Island in August 1721. A fleet of 3 large ships departed from Amsterdam, led by Jacob Roggeveen, a Dutch explorer. The goal of this expedition was to search for the legendary southern continent, which was believed to exist in ancient maps, and to possibly establish a westward route to the Spice Islands. The Spice Islands were easy enough to locate. They are now known as the Maluku Islands in Indonesia. But the southern continent was different. It was a mythical landmass believed to lie at the South Pole, frequently shown on medieval sea charts, though no navigator had ever actually discovered it. Determined to find this unknown land, Roggeveen's fleet crossed the Atlantic Ocean, navigated around South America, and entered the Pacific Ocean on Sunday, April 5, 1722, which happened to be Easter Sunday. The ships were caught in a violent storm with high waves and strong winds. Roggeveen, desperate to find shelter, consulted his maps, but they showed only vast ocean in every direction. Then suddenly, the lookout reported land ahead. Overjoyed, Roggeveen rushed to the deck with his telescope, and sure enough, there appeared to be an island in the distance. It looked like a remote, isolated island. No matter what it was, any land at all would be a blessing in such conditions. He ordered the ships to head toward the island. As they approached, he could see smoke rising from the island, a sign that someone might be living there. While cautiously navigating through reefs, Roggeveen was uneasy, wondering if the island was inhabited by cannibals. But the ships desperately needed fresh water and food, so landing was necessary. As they got closer, they saw a shocking sight. A row of stone statues, about 5 meters tall, standing on stone platforms and facing inward toward the island. As the sailors stared in astonishment, about 10 locals appeared. Most of them were similar in build to the sailors, but to their amazement, they spotted 2 giants among them, around 5 meters tall, with white skin, reddish-blonde hair, and ears that hung down to their shoulders. These giants looked exactly like the Moai statues. The sailors were so frightened that they quickly hid. They observed the giants commanding the smaller islanders, who all obediently followed their orders. Fortunately, the ship had docked at a spot not visible from where the locals stood, so they went unnoticed. Once the islanders had moved on, Roggeveen ordered his crew to quickly find fresh water, stock up, and then set sail immediately. Mr. Roggeveen recorded this strange scene in his maritime logbook. Because he discovered the island on Easter Sunday, he named the small island Easter Island, and he called the giants he saw long-eared people, while the ordinary islanders were called short-eared people. The giant stone statues that Mr. Rovin discovered are now known as Moai statues. More than 300 years have passed, and the origin of the inhabitants of Easter Island, as well as the history behind the giant stone statues, remains a complete mystery. So, were there really giants on Easter Island? Was what Mr. Roggeveen wrote in his maritime journal the truth, a delusion, or merely an intentional fabrication and exaggeration? Because too much time has passed, and there are no other witnesses or records to verify it, this incident has become an unsolved mystery. Easter Island now belongs to the South American country of Chile, located in the Pacific Ocean about 3,700 kilometers west of Santiago, the capital. It is a typical isolated island, often nicknamed the navel of the earth. The island has a circumference of 60 kilometers and an area of about 163 square kilometers, and it is rich in marine resources. The Moai statues are placed all around the island, facing inward, as if they are protecting the island's inhabitants. The appearance of the statues is very abstract. Narrow foreheads, long faces, and long ears. While they resemble humans, they also don't look entirely human. If these statues were indeed based on real human models, then they represent a unique artistic style, a stylized departure from realistic forms. However, judging solely by the long ears, the statues do match the long-eared people Mr. Roggeveen described in his journal. The entire island has around 1,000 Moai statues, each weighing an average of 10 tons, with the largest one over 250 tons, which still lies in a quarry. The people currently living on the island don't look much different from us. There are about 7,000 people, most of whom are Rapa Nui. They believe that the Moai statues were carved to commemorate Ariki, their sacred king, with the purpose of asking for blessings from the divine king for prosperity and harmony. Some archaeologists who studied the island concluded that around the 4th century AD, Easter Island welcomed its first wave of settlers, who were Polynesians from the Pacific Ocean. They lived peacefully together for over 1,000 years until 1772, when Mr. Roggeveen discovered them. This suggests that the things Mr. Roggeveen wrote about giants were nonsense. No such race ever existed. But what everyone wonders is, how could such a small population create so many massive statues, then transport them to the coasts and erect them upright? Experts brainstormed and gathered public input, and finally came up with a plausible explanation. The islanders used basalt tools, a type of hard volcanic rock, to carve the softer volcanic tuff into statues. That is, they used stone tools to carve stone statues. Once the statues were completed, the next challenge was transportation. One theory is the so-called sled transportation method. While there is no snow on Easter Island, the idea of a sled here refers to placing wooden planks on wooden rollers, simulating the sliding effect of a sled. After carving the statues, they were placed on wooden platforms with rolling logs underneath, and then pulled to the coastline before being erected onto stone platforms. In 1999, an American archaeologist named Joe and Van Tilburg conducted a similar experiment in the U.S. First, she created a replica of a Moai statue weighing 9 tons, placed it on a sled with wooden rollers underneath, and then had over 60 people pull it with ropes to move the statue. The Moai did move, but because of its weight, the rollers sank into the ground. Her experiment was conducted on flat terrain, while Easter Island's geography is rough and uneven. So in reality, it couldn't have been as smooth and easy as she demonstrated. Moreover, the actual Moai statues on the island can weigh 90 to 100 tons, nearly 10 times heavier than her replica. Therefore, the sled transportation method seems unreliable. This prompted some archaeologists to study local legends. According to those, the Moai statues moved on their own to their stone platforms, called Ahu, thanks to a mystical force called mana, controlled by the divine king Ariki. This sparked an idea among researchers. What if the statues walked? National Geographic once filmed an experiment for a documentary where archaeologist Charles Love tested this theory. In the documentary, 18 people moved a 3-meter-tall, multi-ton Moai statue forward a few meters. The statue was tied with ropes. Some people pulled from the front, others stabilized it from behind. By carefully shifting weight and coordinating the angle of force, the statue rocked side to side and inched forward, like a child learning to walk. This method, shown in the National Geographic documentary, made a big impact. The walking theory became a popular hypothesis. The statue did move a few steps, showing short-distance transport was feasible, but the distance was too short. Just like the sled method, this technique was only partially proven. The experimenters were never able to fully recreate how a statue could be transported from quarry to final resting place. Modern attempts to reconstruct the process use real measurements combined with computer simulations, but the biggest challenge is that some statues are up to 21 meters tall, weighing 250 to 300 tons. If they tip over during transportation, it would be impossible to lift them again due to their massive weight. Furthermore, the walking method could damage the statue's base, causing cracks or breaks. Therefore, while this method is interesting, it still lacks strong credibility. Some suggest that multiple methods were likely used, sleds on flat terrain, and the walking technique on uneven ground. Although several theories exist, a definitive answer has yet to be found. Currently, Easter Island has become a trending topic. Many media outlets and TV programs visit the island to attract viewers. The History Channel also sent a film crew to create a program about Easter Island. Before filming, the producer read background material on Easter Island and made an astonishing discovery. Someone had actually tried to verify the existence of giants described by Mr. Roggeveen. That person was Francis Messier, an explorer like Roggeveen, but from the 20th century, over 200 years later. After reading Roggeveen's maritime log, Messier decided to personally investigate whether the story was true. In the 1960s, he traveled to Easter Island and knocked on doors, asking locals about the origin of the Moai statues. At the time, there were about 10 elderly residents over 90 years old. They all said the same thing. Their ancestors told them that the Moai statues were created by giants who lived on the island, modeling the statues after their own image. However, by the late 18th to early 19th century, the giants and some islanders mysteriously disappeared overnight. Many statues were toppled and broken, And over time, people forgot that giants had ever lived on the island. The producer found Mezier's writings imaginative and entertaining, but didn't take them too seriously. However, while filming on the island, the crew made a remarkable discovery. Although most Moai face inward, there is one exception. On the western tip of the island, 7 Moai statues called Ahu Akivi face out to sea, toward the Polynesian islands. One of the crew members, curious about this, used a GPS and discovered that the statues faced toward the Marquesas Islands. This clue was shocking. The producer immediately led the team to the Marquesas Islands to investigate further. There, they met a local archaeologist who shared a local legend. A race of giants once lived on the Marquesas Islands. They were 2.5 times taller than ordinary people, able to carry huge stones on their shoulders and run across mountains with ease. Despite their immense strength, they were gentle and peaceful. Their chief was a staunch pacifist, which led many ordinary people to seek refuge with them for protection and aid. However, the area surrounding Marquesas Island was far from peaceful. Different tribes often came to provoke and wage war. The chief of the giant people, weary of such a life, longed for a place of peace. He sent his 7 sons to search for a new land. Not long after, the sons returned and reported that to the west, they had found a small uninhabited island, a paradise. That island was Easter Island as we know it today. The chief then led his people, along with some ordinary humans, to Easter Island. Some explorers claim that giant skeletons can still be found in certain places on Marquesas Island, left behind by this race of giants. The History Channel producer was shocked. Could this be the true story behind Easter Island? Marquesas Island was once a place where giants and humans lived together, with the giants serving as rulers. To avoid conflict, the giants took their human companions and migrated to Easter Island, where they carved the Moai statues. Then, in the 18th century, Mr. Roggeveen accidentally discovered this secret paradise. And a few decades later, the giants and some of the island's inhabitants disappeared overnight. After the History Channel aired this program, it attracted a massive audience. Yet one question remained. Why did the giants and part of the population of Easter Island suddenly disappear? Could it be that they sensed the arrival of Europeans, and once again the giants chose to avoid conflict by leaving? At this point, experts got involved. However, most of them avoided mentioning giants and instead offered a more conventional explanation. The warfare and ecological collapse theory, a scenario familiar in many Hollywood movies. As the island's population grew, tribal conflicts over limited resources began. Violence broke out, food ran scarce, and famine followed. About half a century after Mr. Roggeveen left, it's believed that cannibalism even occurred. Those who survived became disillusioned with the god Ariki they worshipped, believing that instead of protecting them, Ariki brought disaster. As a result, they toppled some of the Moai statues, even smashing a few to vent their anger. However, another group of scholars rejected this theory, arguing that no physical evidence of war or massacre had ever been found. Archaeologists found no proper weapons, only farming tools and bird-hunting gear, nothing like spears or long weapons capable of killing humans. Moreover, human remains excavated on the island show natural causes of death, without signs of violence or mistreatment. So how could there have been war? And as always, when the debate reaches a deadlock, the alien intervention theory makes its appearance. This theory, though crude, overly simplistic, and wild, is oddly convincing and hard to refute. If the ecological theory doesn't work and the warfare theory doesn't work, then blame it on extraterrestrial beings. Since aliens can do whatever they want, they could explain everything. According to believers in this theory, perhaps when the aliens visited Earth for some unknown reason, they took the remaining giants from Easter Island, removed their bones, and cleaned up all traces of their presence. That's why the giants vanished overnight. Sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But they even provide indirect evidence. Archaeologists discovered a statue named Tiki, a traditional deity worshipped by the locals. Its appearance doesn't just resemble an alien. It looks exactly like one, particularly the familiar gray alien, with a large head and big eyes like swimming goggles. Because of this, even some skeptics were left speechless. Could it be that Easter Island was once a testing ground for an extraterrestrial civilization? Whether these speculations involve giants or aliens, none of them appear in any official archaeological records. But official or not, all of these are merely outsider theories. So what about the people who actually live on Easter Island, the Rapa Nui? As the ones who experienced the history firsthand, what do they say? Did the Rapa Nui leave behind any written records? Yes, they did have writing, but unfortunately, no one can read it anymore. The Rapa Nui people did not leave behind historical books or records to pass down their history. Not long after Europeans discovered Easter Island, slave traders began targeting the island's population, By the late 19th century, the abolition of slavery had become a global movement. Under international pressure, the Peruvian government ordered the release and return of around 100 Rapa Nui slaves who were still in Peru. Tragically, the returning Rapa Nui were infected with smallpox as soon as they left the slave camps. Only 15 people survived the journey home. But the virus they brought back wiped out the remaining population on the island. Eventually, only a few hundred Rapa Nui remained. Whether alien intervention ever happened is unknown. But European intervention certainly did, and it had a devastating impact on the Rapa Nui people. The dramatic population collapse interrupted cultural transmission, and oral histories became fragmented. Today, the ancient stories passed down by Rapa Nui elders are incomplete and scattered. There are no written histories, and even their oral traditions have been severely damaged. That's why the early history of Easter Island can no longer be fully reconstructed. Based on remaining oral legends and early European maritime records, there did seem to be a division between two groups, the long-eared and the short-eared people. The long-eared wore earrings and belonged to the ruling class, chiefs and priests. The short-eared were the commoners. The Moai statues clearly reflect the features of the long-eared people. Among all the Polynesian peoples, only the Rapa Nui invented a system of writing. The priests carved a unique pictographic script onto wooden tablets, which the islanders called rongo-rongo, meaning the talking wood. Despite having a small population, the Rapa Nui developed such an advanced and rare writing system that it raises the question. Did they receive help from a more advanced civilization? After European missionaries arrived, rongo-rongo was labeled as pagan and was systematically burned and destroyed, much like what happened to the Maya civilization. Today, very few artifacts remain, and no one can read the script anymore. And so, what may have once been factual memories about giants have now become legends, and from legends, they've turned into myths. That's the end of this story. But what about you? What do you think? Do you believe in the local legend that the Moai statues walk themselves to their platforms, guided by some mystical power? Or do you believe in the archaeological theories involving sleds, rollers, or rope-pulling experiments? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below the video. And with that, we'll wrap up today's content. If you found this video helpful, feel free to share it with a friend who might enjoy it with you.